my general statement on how to increase corporate governance in Japan is to focus on the boardroom. And it'll be a long sentence, but really Japan should aspire to well-trained, skills-based, diversely comprised, majority independent boards.
So welcome to the first episode of 2022 Proxy Watcher TV on our YouTube channel. So today, I will be inviting a special guest, exciting guest from the United States, Ms. Tracy Gopal, a founder of Third Arrow Strategies. And Ms. Gopal has been working for the improvement of the Japanese company's corporate governance for decades. So today, we'll be discussing female leadership and how we can improve and increase diversity of Japanese companies' board. So let's get into discussion. Hi, Tracy. I'm so excited to have an interview with you today. And first of all, I'd like to ask you about your relationship with Japan, because you previously worked in Japan and you've been working with lots of Japanese companies. What attracted to Japan and Japanese companies?
Thank you for the invitation to join your YouTube channel and be interviewed. So my relationship with Japan actually started over 30 years ago, and I was first attracted to Japan because I was studying Japanese in college, and I absolutely loved studying Japanese. And so it was natural for me to want to go to Japan after college, where I went with the JET program to teach English 30 years ago in Shiga and learn more about Japan there. As I returned to the United States and my career progressed, on the first day of every job I joined, I would raise my hand and say, I'm Tracy, please send me to Japan whenever you can. And so from that, I was sent with Ernst & Young in 2000 during the non-performing loan crisis. I later had a job with a Japanese investment bank, GCA. And then when I joined ISS for my corporate governance career, I had the chance to join ISS proxy season for a couple of years. So with all of that, that was more the skills. And each time I would look at Japan and really try to understand, how are the Japanese thinking about this that's different than the United States? And even when I was doing M&A, it wasn't a maximize shareholder value. It was, let's take a bid offer that could be less than liquidation value, but we want to save the employees. And it was always strange and interesting to me. But I really, with all of these different experiences, started to piece together that we're not necessarily on the same exact page as to what is black and white right, and this is right and this is wrong, but how can we learn from each other? And now with my business, my sole focus is basically corporate governance and advancing women in the workplace in Japan, and particularly on the board. And if I were to summarize, I know it's a long answer, but it's the love of Japan, the fascination with Japan, and now a market need. So if you put all those together, I will then say that's a kokorozashi, or a personal mission that unifies skills and passion for a societal purpose.
Thank you. It was great to know about the history between you and Japan. You've seen many Japanese companies as a specialist in corporate governance. And I've been wondering, could you share, your views on what Japanese listed companies in general have to improve?
Sure. So in general, before I answer that question, I want to start with two basic thoughts. One is that all companies need to improve, or most companies around the world are continually improving governance. So whenever I talk about Japan, Japan does so many things right. So I never like to be critical in any way, but there are many opportunities for corporate governance in Japan. The second point I'd like to make is Japan has made a lot of progress in corporate governance, but there's a moving target. And the demands for directors globally are actually really increasing. Now directors are responsible for ESG. Now directors are responsible for climate. Now directors have to ensure diversity in their organizations. And now there's many different changes about what's considered a global best practice. So Japan is improving, but we're not there. And so with that, my general statement on how to increase corporate governance in Japan is to focus on the boardroom. And it'll be a long sentence, but really Japan should aspire to well-trained, skills-based, diversely comprised, majority independent boards. So there were 4 items in there, and I'll go through those again. You know, it's the well-trained, skills-based, diversely comprised, majority independent boards. So that to me covers what I view as some of the keys to corporate governance. And we can't mention everything, but those are the key. And if you start with the last item, that's the majority independence. So if you think about it, right, I mean, not too long ago, really not too long ago, like a decade ago, you know, Japanese boards were all insiders. And then we started to have a rule, okay, 1 independent director. And then they had a rule with the corporate governance code to recommend 2 independent directors. And now for some prime market companies, we're going to, you know, a 3rd independent directors. Meanwhile, the gold standard for independence is majority. And if you think why, I was doing an event on M&A the other week, and we were thinking about, you know, what is the role of the independent directors in M&A? And if you can almost imagine a group of internal management working and collaborating on this project for M&A, they have such buy-in. They want to do the project, and they're already very far down the road. And they've kept the board independent directors up to date to some extent, depending on the company. But 1, even 2 independent directors cannot really, I mean, I would say it would be very difficult for them to truly have oversight over that M&A transaction when there is so much buy-in from internal management. They have to be some pretty amazing outside directors, you know, independent directors to really do that, because that's just a hard position when you're that small minority and there's so much being decided by management to really objectively represent the shareholders and give an objective perspective. Just the sheer number of independent directors needs to be more. So with the next phase, you know, then you say, well trained. Well, this goes to the point, right? So those directors need to be trained in their responsibility, you know, we frequently say that the independent directors have an obligation, right, to the outside shareholders. And while truly, honestly, everyone, all directors should consider, you know, shareholder interest, it seems that the burden lies there. So they've really got to be trained. And Japan is known for being very, very weak in training of board directors. So around the globe, and I'll reference, you know, I think I've heard a quote that says Japan is behind Pakistan, but I don't have the source to support that. But the board training is really, really weak in Japan. And so that is why the Japan Corporate Governance Code also recommends director training. The CFA Institute just came out with a recommendation for Japan director training. And it's basically trying to raise board standards to a global level. And to group the other points about the boards together, why skills-based? Why diversely comprised? Well, both of these are necessary to, number 1, keep the companies cutting edge in a way, right? I mean, make sure the company's on the right strategic path, but also to avoid the risks and the blind spots. I mean, maybe again, maybe it was 5 or 8 years ago, you know, a United States company, I mean, there was a data breach at a company, and all of the investors were looking, you know, does that company have cybersecurity expertise on its board? Do they have that? And now with directors responsible for ESG and human capital and diversity, it's so much more important to make sure that the board is based on skills. And then also we'll talk more about diversity. You know, it's again to avoid blind spots, among many other reasons to have, you know, women on the board. One reason for not just women, but diversity, different countries, people grow up with different experiences. And the way you avoid those blind spots and things you don't know is by having people who are different. I mean, again, you look at Japan, right? And how can we think that having all of the men who grew up at exactly the same age, got exactly the same company internal training, probably went to the exact school, perhaps, and then they had the same training, they're going to all think alike, which may promote harmony on the board, but it doesn't give what the company needs to stay ahead in this now new dynamic world. In Japan, the career paths were so different. And as you know, I run a Japan board diversity network of women, and almost, if not 100%, probably almost, my members all either studied in the United States or they worked for a gaishike, a foreign company. And why is that? It's because they didn't have the chance really to succeed in a Japanese company. So women in Japan actually bring much different experiences.